I'm Laura Kincaid, 34. A soldier, a daughter, and the sister my family turned into a joke. At home, discipline was my duty. Every corner folded sharp, every step precise, every silence mistaken for strength. Mallory never followed rules, she shattered them, and they called it charm. The night she raised her glass at dinner and called me toy soldier, even my father's silence felt like agreement. That laugh carved deeper than any wound. Ever been humiliated by the very people meant to protect you? Hit like if you've ever been dismissed in your own family. Comment if someone else's spotlight erased you. It started there at a table where I wasn't a daughter, just the punchline in uniform. I learned discipline before I even understood what the word meant. My earliest memories are of watching my father crease hospital corners into bed sheets, the movements crisp and sure. Like every fold was a silent salute to the life he had lived in the army. I followed him step by step, mimicking his precision. My small hands struggled with the stiffness of the fabric, but I persisted. That's what he admired, I thought, the persistence, the refusal to quit even when my arms trembled. Mallory was different. She never tried to follow him. If I folded blankets, she tore them apart in a storm of frustration. "She's just spirited," my mother would say, her voice soft, almost apologetic, while smoothing Mallory's hair. The tantrums were forgiven before the tears had even dried. I stood nearby, my neat corners undone, wondering why effort earned me lectures, but chaos earned Mallory indulgence. At school, I marched into classrooms as if they were barracks. Teachers called me focused, serious beyond my years. Mallory floated in behind me, sunshine in her hair, laughter in her throat, and everyone lit up as if she carried a spark I didn't. When she forgot her homework, she earned a smile. When I forgot mine, it was treated like a crime against order. I convinced myself that discipline was my badge of honor, but I noticed how everyone turned to her, not me, when the spotlight shone. My father praised me for staying sharp, for keeping routines, for doing things the right way. But there was always an undertone, like discipline was expected from me, nothing special. When Mallory remembered to set the table without being asked, the applause lasted through dessert. I swallowed resentment like dry bread, never letting it show, because I thought silence was strength. That silence carried into dinners where the flag outside our house fluttered against the Oklahoma sky, a reminder that we were a family of service, of duty. I sat tall at the table, fork held with military precision, while Mallory slouched and made faces until my mother giggled. I tried to ignore her, to focus on the rhythm of chewing and swallowing, but then came the words that carved deeper than any knife. "Toy soldier Laura, reporting for duty," she sneered, snapping her hand in a mocking salute. The table erupted in a burst of laughter too sharp for my ears. Even my father's lips twitched, though he said nothing. His silence burned more than any scolding could have. In that moment, his stillness felt like approval, like he agreed she was right. I stared at my plate, the neat rows of peas and potatoes blurring together. My chest swelled, not with pride, but with a hollow ache. If I was a soldier, then I was one without a country valued for discipline, dismissed for humanity. Mallory laughed louder, satisfied with the damage she'd done. One day, she won't laugh so easily. My father left no fortune. He left an obligation. The November air cut sharp as a blade, and I felt it slice through the wool of my uniform as I stood at Arlington. Rows upon rows of white headstones stretched in flawless formation, a parade of silence and sacrifice. The honor guard moved with machine precision, boots striking against the frozen ground in a rhythm I had known since childhood. My dress blues were stiff on my shoulders, the brass polished so bright I could see fragments of my face in the reflection. Father would have approved of the sharpness, of the exactness. He would not have approved of the ache in my throat. The casket draped in the flag looked heavier than anything I had ever saluted. My breath stilled as I watched them carry him forward, their steps in perfect cadence, the stars and stripes shifting softly with each motion. A hush fell over the family gathered on either side of the path, as if the air itself bowed. My mother clutched her handkerchief, knuckles pale, lips pressed so tightly, I wondered if sound would ever escape her again. And then Mallory arrived. Late, of course. The click of her heels rang out louder than the rifles that would fire later. She swept in with a fur collar framing her neck, her dress catching the breeze like it had been chosen for a gala rather than a burial. The perfume she wore stabbed through the solemn air, an intrusion, a challenge. I lowered my gaze, but she found me anyway. She leaned closer than necessary, her breath warm and cruel against my ear. Nice costume, Laura, she whispered, loud enough for the cousins behind us to stiffen. The word costume cut deeper than any blade. My jaw tensed, but I kept my eyes on the flag, on the casket, on the soldiers who bore him. I would not give her the satisfaction of seeing me break. Mother hissed her name Mallory, but the correction was soft, too soft. The damage was done. I could feel the ripple of eyes moving across my uniform, weighing whether they should laugh, whether they should pity me. I kept still, spine locked like a parade rest, pretending I couldn't hear, pretending I was as unmoved as marble. The chaplain's words blurred into the cold wind, but the sound of the rifles did not. 3 volleys cracked the sky, each report rattling in my chest like a second heartbeat. The bugle cried after, its notes sharp, fragile, impossible to hold without trembling. I clenched my fists against my sides, the leather of my gloves biting into my palms. My whole body wanted to shudder, to shake loose the anger. But I stood unbroken. I would not dishonor him. I would not dishonor myself. Mallory dabbed theatrically at her eyes, her shoulders shaking in exaggerated sobs. It was a performance. She loved the stage, no matter the script. Some of the relatives shifted, uncomfortable, but no one challenged her. They never had. Even in death, my father's silence seemed to shield her, as though his discipline had been reserved for me alone. When the final flag was folded and presented to my mother, I watched her fingers tremble around the triangle of stars. She pressed it to her chest, as if it could replace the man. My throat closed tight, but I forced the air steady in my lungs. My uniform was more than fabric. It was a vow stitched into every seam. The crowd drifted away, footsteps muffled against the grass. Condolences floated around me like ash, meaningless phrases spoken from habit. Soon, there was only me, the headstones, and the silence. I knelt at his grave, the earth still fresh, the flag snapping above, as if it knew the weight it carried now. My shadow stretched across the marble, thin and fragile against so many others. I whispered into the wind, not for anyone else to hear, but for myself, for him. I'll carry his discipline, even if no one else sees. No one believes a woman could fly a fighter jet, not even me. The Mississippi sun scorched the tarmac so fiercely that the heat shimmered like a veil over the runway. My flight suit clung to my skin, heavy with sweat and nerves. The engine behind me roared with a hunger I still doubted I could control. As I adjusted my helmet, I thought of Father, the way he taught me to square corners on a bedspread until the fabric was taut enough to bounce a coin. Precision was supposed to be strength, but precision alone, I was learning, wasn't enough up here. The solo flight had been mechanical, every checklist completed, every maneuver ticked off like the lines of a textbook problem. When I landed, I allowed myself a breath of relief. For a second, I thought I had proven them wrong. But then the instructor's voice sliced through the illusion. "You're too stiff, Kincaid. Combat won't wait for textbooks." The words hit harder than the G-forces. His eyes narrowed under the brim of his cap, arms crossed like a closed gate. I could feel the smirks from the row of trainees behind him. Their laughter wasn't loud, but it was sharp, like the hiss of air leaking from a pressurized cabin. One of them muttered something I couldn't quite catch, but I knew it was about me. I had heard enough variations already, questions about my strength, my nerve, my right to wear the same wings they coveted. Later, when I returned to the locker room, I found their message made visible. A crude drawing of a Barbie doll had been taped to my locker door. The doll wore aviator sunglasses too large for her plastic face, her hand raised in a parody of a salute. Across the paper, someone had scrawled in thick black marker, "Pilot Barbie." I peeled it off slowly, my gloves tugging against the tape. My chest burned, not with shame, but with the effort it took not to let them see me falter. I folded the paper into the smallest square possible and tucked it into my pocket, a reminder I refused to throw away. If I couldn't silence their laughter, I could absorb it, bury it under layers of grit. At night, in the cramped barracks, I turned to the only confidant I trusted, my journal. The pages smelled faintly of ink and leather, and the lines absorbed words I could never speak aloud. I wrote of my fear that every mistake I made would not be mine alone, but a verdict passed on every woman who came after me. If I stumbled, they would not say Laura Kincaid failed. They would say women failed. And that weight was heavier than any aircraft. The next morning, the instructor called me aside after drills. His face was weathered, sunken, in a way that told me he had been doing this long before I was born. He didn't bother lowering his voice. "Some pilots fit. Some don't. You decide which you are. The sentence carved itself into me. I stood frozen, my helmet tucked under my arm, the laughter of my peers buzzing just beyond earshot. His words weren't cruel in tone, but they carried the finality of a gavel. It wasn't advice. It was a judgment waiting for confirmation. That night, I opened my journal again, my hands trembling as I pressed the pen down hard enough to tear the paper. I forced myself to write the truth I could no longer swallow. If I fail, they'll say women failed. Mallory never wastes a good audience to humiliate me. The drive back to Tulsa had always filled me with a strange tension, half nostalgia, half dread. By the time I pulled up to my mother's house for her birthday dinner, the November chill had already crept under my skin. The porch light glowed warmly. The familiar American flag stirred in the breeze, but my stomach tightened the way it used to before flight checks. My dress blues felt stiff against my shoulders, and though the uniform gave me pride on base, here it felt like armor I knew would be tested. Inside, voices rose in laughter and clinking glasses. Relatives I hadn't seen in years gathered around Margaret's table, plates piled high, wine flowing easily. My mother's smile was soft, welcoming, but weary around the edges. She squeezed my hand as I kissed her cheek, as if to apologize in advance for whatever storm might come. Mallory was already in her element. Her arrival had been fashionably late, her entrance as orchestrated as a stage cue. She wore a shimmering dress better suited for a gala than a family dinner, her hair swept in waves, her phone angled in her hand as though the room itself existed for her Instagram story. The moment she spotted me, her grin widened not in greeting, but in anticipation. "Well, if it isn't Lieutenant Blanket," she said loudly enough for the room to hush. A few chuckles bubbled around the table. My jaw tightened, but I held my silence. As dishes were passed and glasses filled, she leaned back in her chair, her voice rising above the hum. "Do you all remember when Laura used to fold everything like Dad was about to inspect it? Sheets, towels, even the couch throw." She mimed, tucking in corners with exaggerated precision, eliciting laughs. "I swear, if the fabric didn't snap back at you, she thought it was a failure." I fixed my eyes on my plate, forcing my fork through roasted potatoes I could no longer taste. I felt the heat crawl up my neck, but I refused to give her the spectacle of my reaction. It wasn't enough for her to tell the story. Mallory leaned back and, with a flourish, began to sing, a lilting, mocking tune, crafted on the spot, that twisted my middle name into a punchline. "Colleen, the queen of corners, Colleen, the folded dream," she crooned, tapping her fork against her glass like a makeshift metronome. Laughter rippled down the table. Some relatives chuckled nervously, others openly delighted. I tried to steady my breathing, reminding myself of the lessons from flight training. Control under pressure, no sudden movements, no cracks in the facade. Yet every laugh was another round fired, and with each one, I felt smaller, reduced to the caricature she painted. My mother murmured, "Mallory, enough," but her voice was drowned in the tide of amusement. When the song ended, Mallory bowed theatrically, basking in her applause. My chest ached with the weight of humiliation. I had faced the roar of engines and the harsh scrutiny of instructors, but nothing stripped me bare like the sound of my own family laughing at me. And then, as the noise died down, Mallory's eyes sparkled with a fresh trick. She tapped her glass again, drawing attention. "By the way, everyone," she announced, her voice sugar-sweet, "I'd like you to meet someone special." From the doorway, a tall man stepped forward. Ethan, broad-shouldered, with a quiet composure that contrasted Mallory's showmanship. He shook hands firmly, his eyes steady as they met mine across the room. And in that fleeting moment, as laughter still lingered in the air, I caught something unexpected in his gaze, not mockery, not pity, but a flicker of respect. Some emails reek of trouble before you even open them. The glow of my laptop was the only light in the room, a square of cold blue against the otherwise dim quarters. The air conditioner hummed softly, punctuating the silence with its mechanical rhythm, but I barely heard it. My eyes stayed fixed on the notification that had just pinged across the screen. The sender's name was all too familiar. Mallory. For a moment, I considered ignoring it. My pulse had already quickened before I even hovered over the subject line. Years of her words had trained me to anticipate the sting before the blow was delivered. Finally, with a slow inhale, I clicked. The subject line sprawled across the top. "Don't forget my engagement party. Please don't wear cosplay uniforms." The words blurred as my throat tightened. I leaned back in my chair, staring at them as if they might rearrange themselves into something less cruel. But Mallory never wasted a chance. Even across the distance of states, through the sterile medium of text on a screen, she managed to sneer. The jab wasn't subtle, wasn't clever, it was blunt, calculated to wound. I could almost hear her voice, that lilting, practiced mockery she'd wielded at every family gathering. I could see her laughing at her own wit, expecting everyone else to join in, knowing my silence would make the insult land harder. I clenched my jaw until it ached, forcing myself not to slam the laptop shut. The cursor blinked in the empty body of the email, taunting me with its steady pulse. I imagined firing back a retort sharp, clean, devastating, but I knew it would only fuel her. Mallory thrived on reaction. Before I could type anything, my phone lit up on the desk beside me. "Mom," I hesitated, then answered. "Hi, Mom." Margaret's voice carried both warmth and worry, soft but urgent. "Laura, sweetheart, I just wanted to make sure you got Mallory's email. I know how she can be." A pause, the sound of her steadying herself. "But it would mean the world if you came. For family unity. Family unity." The phrase landed like a stone in my chest. I thought of all the years that unity had meant my silence while Mallory's barbs dug deeper. Unity had meant being the butt of the joke while the rest of them laughed or looked away. Still, Margaret's voice tugged at me, weary and hopeful. "Mom," I started, but the words dissolved. I wanted to tell her I was tired of playing the role, tired of swallowing every insult. Yet I heard the unspoken plea beneath her words. She didn't want another fracture, another absence at a family milestone. "Please," she whispered, "just this once more. For me." The silence stretched, and in it, years of memories pressed against me. The folded blankets, the funeral whispers, the mocking song at the birthday dinner. Each moment etched into me like lines on my skin, invisible to everyone but me. I looked at the insignia gleaming on my desk, polished earlier with the kind of care only habit could produce. My rank wasn't a costume. It was my father's discipline carried forward, my own sweat and sacrifice. Mallory could belittle it, but she couldn't erase what it cost me to earn it. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, trembling only slightly. In the end, I typed nothing more than 4 words. "I'll be there." I didn't sign it with love, didn't add pleasantries. Just a declaration, simple and unyielding. I hit send before doubt could creep in. The room seemed to grow quieter after the email vanished into the ether. I closed the laptop slowly, the sound of the hinge echoing louder than it should have. My gaze fell once again to the insignia, catching the dim light as though it glowed with its own resolve. I whispered to the empty room, unsure if I was promising myself or daring fate. To reconcile or to end this once and for all? Mallory never threw a party without sharpening her knives first. The Manhattan skyline glittered like a crown as I stepped out onto the rooftop lounge. A humid summer night pressed against the skin, but the city lights dazzled enough to distract from the heat. The rooftop had been transformed into a spectacle, white lights draped along glass railings, champagne fountains bubbling like liquid gold, and an endless flow of laughter that spilled louder than the music. It wasn't a family gathering, it was a staged production, and Mallory, as always, had cast herself in the starring role. She floated through the crowd in a shimmering gown, her left hand raised as though the diamond ring might otherwise be missed. Each time the cameras flashed, she tilted her fingers just so, ensuring the stone refracted enough light to dazzle both lenses and guests. A cluster of reporters circled her, pens poised, voices eager. Mallory thrived in this glow, every glance confirming her belief that the world bent toward her. I remained on the edge of the crowd, my dress uniform pressed sharp, the insignia polished to a gleam. Yet here, in this sea of sequins and glass, I felt invisible. Conversations swirled around me but never included me. People's eyes flicked across me with brief curiosity before sliding away. To them, I wasn't Laura Kincaid, Air Force officer. I was simply Mallory's sister, the convenient prop in her ongoing drama. Margaret hovered nearby, her smile strained. She clasped her hands too tightly in front of her, the way she always did when trying to prevent a scene. "Thank you for coming," she whispered as she brushed past me, her eyes pleading without words. I nodded, offering her nothing more, because even kindness felt dangerous here. Ethan appeared then, cutting through the swirl of chatter with surprising calm. He carried himself with ease, though he wasn't showy. His suit fit cleanly, his presence understated among the glitter, but his eyes found mine with deliberate intent. "Laura," he said, his voice firm, respectful. "It's good to see you again." I blinked, caught off guard by the weight in his tone. There was no smirk, no indulgence, just recognition. I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could form a word, Mallory swept in. "There she is!" she exclaimed, her voice pitched high enough for the nearest photographers to perk up. She looped her arm possessively through Ethan's and tugged him closer. "My sister, the one who never misses a chance to show off her cosplay uniform." Laughter rippled across the crowd. A few guests tittered politely, others chuckled outright, and even one of the reporters allowed a low laugh as he scribbled notes. The sound spread like wildfire, each chuckle another knife pressed against my ribs. I stood frozen, the smile I attempted refusing to materialize. My throat tightened, the words I wanted to fire back dissolving before they could leave me. Every instinct screamed to defend the uniform I wore, to demand respect not just for me, but for the service it represented. Yet silence, I reminded myself, was its own form of strength. I swallowed hard, the taste bitter. Mallory basked in the reaction, her grin wide and polished. She tilted her head toward me as if to ensure the spotlight illuminated her cruelty just right. "Don't worry, everyone," she added, her voice laced with syrup. "She takes it very seriously, almost like she's auditioning for a role." Cameras clicked. My fists tightened at my sides, nails biting into palms I refused to unclench. I kept my eyes forward, spine unyielding, though inside I felt the weight of humiliation press heavier with each burst of laughter. Then, amid the din, Ethan's gaze lingered. Subtle, faint, but unmistakable. His eyes didn't mock. They studied, deliberate and steady, as though he saw past the costume Mallory painted and into the steel beneath. For a breath, it felt like the noise around us dimmed, leaving only that silent recognition hanging between us. Sometimes strangers see you clearer than blood. The rooftop lights had dimmed into memory by the time I slipped into the quiet cafe below the lounge. It was late, the kind of hour when most people had already surrendered to the city's pulse and disappeared home. The cafe hummed with a softer rhythm-muted jazz, a faint hiss of the espresso machine, the clink of ceramic cups. I had come here for escape, to drown the sour aftertaste of laughter and flashing cameras with bitter coffee. I ordered black, no sugar. The server gave me a curious glance, still in uniform, still carrying the weight of the spectacle upstairs, but asked no questions. I carried the steaming cup to a table tucked against the wall, away from the windows, as though shadows could shield me from the echo of Mallory's voice. I barely had time to sip before Ethan appeared. His stride was deliberate, neither rushed nor hesitant, as if he'd known exactly where I'd be. He didn't ask permission when he reached my table. He simply nodded, waiting for the faintest tilt of my head before sliding into the seat across from me. "Rough crowd," he said quietly, glancing toward the ceiling as though the rooftop celebration still hovered above us. His tone was low, almost conspiratorial, and not touched with the mockery I expected. I kept my eyes on the coffee. "I'm used to it." "I could tell," he replied. There was no pity in his voice, only observation. "But I think you deserve better than being someone else's punchline." The words startled me more than I let on. I gave a practiced shrug, the kind I'd perfected in barracks where admitting pain meant weakness. It comes with the territory. Ethan leaned forward, elbows resting on the table. His gaze didn't waver. "Air Force service, right? Your active duty?" A pulse of wariness coursed through me. Mallory must have told him, or maybe one of the guests had. I set my cup down carefully, as though its placement could buy me time. "I am. But I don't usually talk about it at parties or cafes." He smiled faintly, not amused, but thoughtful. "I figured. You strike me as someone who carries things quietly. The kind of person who lets actions speak louder. Or maybe I just don't like strangers prying." "Fair," he conceded, leaning back. For a moment he was silent, as if weighing something. Then his voice lowered. "Do you know the name Mark Ramirez?" The name hit like a gust of cold wind. I kept my expression neutral, though my heartbeat betrayed me. "I've heard it before," I said carefully. "He's my best friend," Ethan explained. "We grew up together in Queens. 2 years ago, he was deployed overseas. He doesn't talk much about what happened, but he told me about a classified evacuation. His convoy was ambushed, pinned down. They were pulled out under fire by a pilot who shouldn't have made it through the valley alive." Ethan's eyes narrowed slightly, searching my face. He said it was a woman. My chest tightened, memory flooding unbidden, the roar of the engines, the ground shaking with mortar fire, the voices over comms, panicked and fractured. The moment I pushed the jet harder than doctrine allowed, threading the impossible path through smoke and tracer fire. I don't talk about operations, I said firmly, though my voice felt thinner than I wanted. Ethan studied me. I know you can't, but he told me once his words, not mine, that whoever that pilot was saved more than lives that day, saved the faith of every soldier on that field. His tone softened, the edges worn with sincerity. I think that was you. The air between us thickened. I gripped the coffee cup, its heat burning into my palms, anchoring me to the moment. I couldn't confirm it. I couldn't deny it. Silence was my only shield. Ethan didn't press. He leaned back slowly, his eyes still fixed on me with that same unsettling respect. Then, just as easily as he'd arrived, he let the subject drop. He stood, adjusting his jacket. "Thanks for the coffee," he said simply, though he hadn't ordered anything. I stiffened, muscles taut, words caught behind my teeth. The cafe's door chimed as he left, and I was left alone with the untouched coffee and a truth I couldn't allow to surface. His parting glance lingered in my mind long after he'd vanished, carrying questions I wasn't ready to answer. Mallory's sharpest weapon wasn't her tongue, it was her feed. The glow of my laptop painted the dorm room in cold blue light. Outside, the base was quiet, only the occasional hum of a passing vehicle breaking the silence. I should have been asleep tomorrow's drills, wouldn't forgive exhaustion, but Mallory had a way of keeping me awake without ever stepping foot in the same state. The notification ping was like a mosquito's whine, small but impossible to ignore. I clicked, and there it was, her latest reel, already climbing into the thousands of views. Mallory's face filled the frame, hair perfectly curled, smile staged but effortless. She angled her engagement ring to catch the light, then let out a mock sigh. "Grateful Ethan doesn't wear cosplay uniforms, haha." The caption carried a trail of hearts and champagne emojis, but it was the laughter behind the words that cut. The comments piled fast. "Savage Utava. Poor sister must be fuming right now. Uniform Barbie strikes again." A row of skull emojis followed, the digital equivalent of hyenas circling a wounded animal. My hand hovered over the mouse, scrolling against my better judgment. Each swipe brought more ridicule. Strangers who had never spoken to me felt entitled to laugh at me, to take her word as gospel. Mallory didn't need to say my name. Everyone knew. The dorm door creaked open, and Sarah Torres slipped in, still in PT gear, sweat darkening the collar. She glanced at the screen, her brows knitting as she tossed her duffel down. "She posted again, didn't she?" I closed the laptop halfway, ashamed of being caught in the act, but Sarah had already seen enough. She dropped into the chair across from me, propping her elbows on her knees. "Ma'am, you've flown combat sorties under fire. Why let Instagram rattle you?" "It's different," I muttered, staring at the edge of the desk. "I know how to fight enemies I can see." Sarah leaned back, her expression firm but not unkind. "You don't have to fight her on her turf. She's playing to an audience that feeds on humiliation. You control your own story." Her words carried the weight of sincerity I wasn't ready to accept. I reopened the laptop, compelled to see the damage again. The video's views had already doubled. My jaw locked, the muscles straining, as though I were bracing against turbulence. "She'll twist anything I do," I said, more to myself than to her. "If I ignore it, she wins. If I respond, she still wins." Sarah leaned forward, her eyes holding mine. "You've fought wars tougher than this one." The silence that followed was heavy, pressing against the walls of the room. I wanted to believe her, wanted to summon the same certainty I carried in the cockpit. But online mockery was a different battlefield, one where the rules were as slippery as Mallory's smile. Just as I was about to close the laptop, another notification bloomed on the screen. This one wasn't from Instagram. My email inbox pulsed with a new message. The sender's name froze me in place. Fatima A. Doha. Not all gratitude fades with time. The lamp in my quarters cast a circle of amber light on the desk, leaving the rest of the room in shadow. The laptop's glow cut across the dimness, the cursor pulsing like a heartbeat over the unopened message. My palms were damp. I had faced live fire and roaring engines, but this, an email with nothing more dangerous than words, felt heavier. I clicked. Fatima A. Doha. Her words unfolded on the screen, line after line, pouring out in a stream of memory and reverence. She began with a simple greeting, and then the details spilled forth the night of the 2018 evacuation, the chaos at the border checkpoint, the tear gas in the air, the desperate crowd pressing against razor wire. She remembered the voice over the loudspeaker, calm but firm, guiding families into the transport zone. She remembered the pilot's call sign that came through on the radio, promising they would not be left behind. "You were that pilot," she wrote. "I never saw your face, only the steady way your voice held when everything else was falling apart. You told us to keep moving, to hold our children high. My son was lifted into that aircraft because of your orders. He is 8 now. He goes to school in a safe place. He reads. He laughs. Because of you, my child lives free." The words blurred as my eyes burned, the letters swimming into one another. I pressed a hand to my mouth, holding in the sound that clawed at my throat. No medal, no salute, no headline had ever reached me like this woman's gratitude. I read the email again, slower this time, tracing every syllable as if committing it to memory. Each line was a counterweight to the years of Mallory's jeers, to every snide comment, every laugh at my expense. My sister had tried to strip me down to nothing but a costume. This letter clothed me in truth. The door opened softly behind me. Sarah's reflection flickered in the darkened window as she stepped into the room. "You're still awake," she said, then noticed the sheen on my cheeks. "What happened?" I turned the screen toward her, unable to speak. She leaned closer, reading silently. When she finished, she exhaled slowly, almost reverently. "This," she whispered, "this is who you really are. Not her caricature, not her lies. This." Her hand brushed my shoulder, grounding me in the moment. For the first time in years, I felt the weight of humiliation lift not all of it, but enough to breathe differently. The shame Mallory wielded so skillfully seemed small against the enormity of a mother's thanks. I reached the climax of the letter again, unable to resist. "Because of you, my child lives free." The words echoed in my head like a hymn, simple and unshakable. They struck a part of me deeper than duty, deeper than pride. It was purpose. I folded the email into permanence by printing it, the paper warm in my hands as though carrying its own pulse. Sliding it into a folder, I whispered into the stillness, each syllable forged with iron. "At her engagement, I won't bow." It's ironic Mallory begged me not to embarrass her, yet she sealed her own fate in gold foil. The afternoon sun filtered through lace curtains, laying long golden stripes across Margaret's polished oak table. The house smelled of lemon polish and faintly of roses from the garden outside. Relatives filled every chair, murmuring with polite anticipation, teacups clinking. It was supposed to be a simple family gathering, but when Mallory orchestrated anything, simplicity never survived. She swept into the dining room wearing a pastel dress that glittered at the edges, a stack of ivory envelopes in her hand, like a queen dealing favors. "Ladies and gentlemen," she sang, her voice pitched just enough to hush conversations. "The moment you've been waiting for, the golden invitations." I watched as she glided from cousin to aunt to uncle, pressing the embossed cards into their hands, pausing for compliments. The foil glimmered in the light, each one stamped with her and Ethan's initials entwined in looping script. Whispers rose in admiration. Margaret beamed faintly, though weariness dulled her eyes. When Mallory finally stopped in front of me, she lingered. "And for my dear sister," she said sweetly, sliding the envelope onto my plate as though she were crowning me with something precious. Her eyes sharpened, though, a flash of steel beneath the sugar. "Promise me, Laura, no cosplay at the altar. The guests won't know if they should salute or laugh." A ripple of laughter drifted around the table, some polite, some genuine. My mother's lips tightened. She reached for my arm and whispered, barely audible, "Please, Laura, just let it go." Her plea cut deeper than Mallory's jab. Let it go. As if my years of training, my rank, my sacrifices were a tantrum to be hushed for the sake of harmony. As if silence equaled love. My fingers brushed the envelope, its gilded lettering glinting like a taunt. For a moment I felt that old, familiar heat of humiliation rising, the instinct to bow my head and swallow the sting. But the memory of Fatima's words stirred like a current beneath my ribs. "Because of you, my child lives free." Those words lived here, in me, stronger than Mallory's sneer. I pushed back my chair. The scrape echoed too loud in the room, conversations halting. Standing, I looked directly at my sister, Then, at the semicircle of family leaning forward, my voice carried before I even realized it had risen. "I will wear my uniform," I said, every syllable carved with certainty. "I am Captain Laura Kincaid." The room froze. Teacups stilled midair. Forks clinked faintly against plates, abandoned. Margaret's eyes filled with both fear and pride, her lips parted but silent. The chuckles evaporated. Mallory's smirk faltered, just slightly, like glass catching a crack. She tilted her head, searching for a comeback, but none arrived in time. The silence she'd always commanded now belonged to me. The first fracture in her control gleamed like sunlight breaking through a storm. Some halls are built for celebration. Others become arenas. The ballroom glowed, like a cathedral of wealth-glass chandeliers spilling firelight across white-draped tables, violins humming in the corner, champagne bubbling in crystal flutes. Guests clustered around Mallory as though she were royalty, her ring lifted constantly for inspection, her laughter pitched to carry across the hall. Influencers snapped photos against the flower wall, tagging hashtags before the night was half over. For them, this was a party. For me, it was a battlefield disguised in silk and sequins. I entered alone, the carpet muffling my footsteps, my uniform pressed to a razor edge. The blue fabric bore my rank with clarity. My shoulders squared beneath the weight of unseen eyes. For a second, the violins faltered. The hush that rippled across the room was sharper than any blade. Conversations stuttered, gazes shifted. It was as if a ghost had walked in, not a guest. Margaret, near the back, pressed her fingers to her lips. She knew the risk I'd taken, the decision I had already made in Tulsa. I had promised I would not bend. My uniform was not costume, not cosplay. It was my truth. Mallory saw me and, like a hawk spotting prey, seized the microphone from the DJ booth. Well, she purred, her voice magnified through the speakers. "My sister thinks Halloween comes early." The room erupted. Laughter rolled like a tide, cruel in its volume, camera flashes stinging my eyes. Phone screens tilted up, capturing the moment an image, a clip, a meme in waiting. A sea of smiles fed on my discomfort. I stood motionless, spine stiff, as if still before an inspection line. Inside, though, the old wounds burned raw. I felt the weight of every whisper since childhood toy soldier, robot, stiff Laura. My chest rose, steady despite the storm. I reminded myself of the letter folded safe in my room. "Because of you, my child lives free." They could not see it, but I could. Mallory beamed under the chandeliers, soaking in the triumph, her hand on Ethan's arm as if sealing the mockery with her engagement itself. She turned, savoring the laughter like a toast. I remained still, the ridicule washing over me yet leaving something intact, something untouchable. And then movement. Ethan rose from his seat. He did not smile, did not laugh. His eyes, steady and unflinching, locked onto mine across the glittering room. Laughter is light until it cuts like glass. The chandeliers trembled with the force of it, echoes of laughter slashing across the ballroom, until it felt as though the walls themselves vibrated with mockery. Mallory stood at the center of it all, framed by flowers and the glare of stage lights, microphone poised like a weapon in her manicured hand. Her smile was a scythe. She raised her flute of champagne, the diamond on her finger catching fire under the spotlight. "Captain of what?" she called out sweetly, her tone dripping with venom. "A fantasy fleet? An imaginary squadron?" The audience roared, delighted in the cruelty, hungry for more. Phones tilted upward, recording my stillness, freezing my face into endless digital fragments. Notifications must have already been blooming on screens worldwide, hashtags coined on the spot. Number cosplay captain, number Mallory wins. Each one was a shard of glass hurled into my skin. I breathed deeply, jaw locked, spine locked even harder. The lessons of my father's drills reverberated in my blood discipline in the face of fire. I kept my gaze forward, unflinching, but inside, fury and shame twisted like twin storms. Mallory basked in the storm she had created. She tilted her head, blonde hair glimmering, eyes alive with conquest. "Oh, don't pout, Laura," she crooned. "We love you. We really do. That's why I'll make you part of tonight's memory." She gestured toward me, raising her glass higher. "A toast to my sister. May she live in the real world someday." The laughter spiked, sharper than ever, and for a heartbeat, I thought the ceiling might shatter under its weight. Faces blurred in my vision, relatives smirking, strangers smirking harder, the bright eyes of influencers waiting to post the moment that would define me forever. I focused on my breath. In, out. The steel in my lungs steadied the tremor in my chest. Through the chaos, my eyes found Ethan. He hadn't laughed. He hadn't moved until now. But as the cruel toast rang out and Mallory basked in her victory, Ethan rose slowly from his chair. The scrape of wood against marble silenced the nearest table. He stepped into the open space, his voice low but resonant, slicing through the storm. Enough. Respect when true silences 1,000 jeers. The ballroom that only moments ago had thundered with laughter now held its breath. Ethan stood in the center of the polished floor, shoulders squared, his gaze never leaving mine. And then slowly, deliberately, he bent at the waist in a deep bow. His voice carried clear as the chandeliers overhead. Captain Kincaid, I owe you. The words cracked the air like a rifle volley. A ripple moved through the crowd, murmurs rising, as if disbelief needed to be spoken aloud. Cameras zoomed in. Flashes blinked like lightning, trying to capture the impossible image. A groom to be bowing to the woman his fiancé had just mocked. Mallory froze mid-smirk, the microphone hanging loose in her hand. What are you doing?" she hissed, her laugh faltering as her cheeks flushed. Ethan straightened, his jaw tight. "You all laugh at her uniform, but you don't know what it means. You don't know what she's done." He swept his gaze across the guests, the influencers, the relatives who had leaned into Mallory's jokes. "I do." Gasps punctured the silence as a man stepped from the back of the hall, dark suit, steady eyes, emotion brimming at the edges. My breath caught. Mark Ramirez. His presence alone felt heavier than any rank insignia I had ever worn. He approached slowly, nodding to me with reverence. "This woman," Ethan continued, voice rising, "pulled him out alive when everything was burning. 2018, a mission most of you will never hear about. She flew into fire no one else dared touch. She saved my brother in all but blood." Mark's throat worked as he tried to speak. At last he managed. "She found me when the building was collapsing, dragged me through smoke. I shouldn't be here, but I am, because of her." The room inhaled as one, and then nothing. No laughter, no whispers, just the truth standing naked between us. The chandeliers seemed to dim in reverence. I felt my spine lengthen, my chin lift higher. Ethan stayed bowed, Mark's words anchoring the silence in a way that made it unbreakable. I was no caricature, no costume. I was a captain. Mallory's face blanched, then reddened. She fumbled with the microphone, her voice shrill, cracking against the hush. This isn't about her. The higher the pedestal, the sharper the fall." The ballroom, gilded only minutes before by laughter and flashbulbs, now trembled with a different kind of energy. Whispers crackled like static, moving from table to table, blending into the staccato of typing thumbs. Screens lit up across the hall, a new tide rising before Mallory's eyes. "Number respect, Captain. Number bow down." The shift was swift and merciless. Mallory's voice shrilled over the murmurs, her hand trembling around the microphone. "Stop filming!" she barked. But the command only drew more lenses toward her. She had always thrived on visibility, but tonight visibility was a blade. Every angle captured her unraveling. Margaret pressed a hand to her mouth, tears spilling freely. She reached toward me with one hand, toward Mallory with the other, torn down the middle. "Please," she whispered, though no one could hear her over the clamor. Her grief was not for the cameras, it was for the daughters she had lost to war of a different kind. Ethan stepped closer to Mallory, his voice calm, almost tender, yet firm enough to cut through the chaos. "Your mockery ends tonight." His words weren't a shout. They didn't need to be. They carried on the silence that followed gasps and made the truth undeniable. Mallory's painted smile cracked. Her eyes darted across the hall, desperate for an ally, for a smirk to mirror her own. But none came. The relatives who had once laughed with her now turned their faces, unwilling to be caught on the wrong side of the tide. Guests shifted in their seats. Reporters leaned forward, scenting blood. The diamond ring that had been her crown glittered beneath unforgiving light. She thrust it upward like proof of sovereignty. "You bow to her!" she screamed at Ethan, voice breaking. "Not me!" The sound splintered through the chandeliers, raw and jagged. Then, like glass shattering, she hurled the microphone to the floor. Feedback shrieked as she stormed off the stage, skirts whipping behind her. The crowd parted in uneasy silence, but cameras followed relentlessly, documenting every jagged step of her retreat. The livestream comments scrolled faster than the eye could catch. "She's losing it. poor captain, Mallory exposed. I felt Margaret trembling beside me, her sobs shaking through the silk of her gown. I touched her arm lightly, steady, quiet. I never wanted her ruined, I whispered, the words barely leaving my lips. She chose this. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it settles like a quiet flag. The ballroom behind us still hummed with the residue of scandal reporters swarming, guests whispering in tight circles, the sharp clicks of cameras puncturing the air. But out here, on the terrace beneath the Manhattan skyline, the noise softened into distance. The night carried only the pulse of traffic below, the faint rustle of flags hanging from the hotel facade, and the weight of what had just unfolded. Margaret leaned into me, her hands cold, her voice splintered. "I didn't want this. Not like this," she murmured, her eyes searching mine for some explanation. The city lights glimmered in her tears, and I realized that she had never seen either of us, Mallory or me, without the blur of maternal hope. I rested a hand on hers, steady, anchoring. "This was never about revenge, Mom," I said softly. "It was about truth." The words left me like a vow fulfilled. The same vow I had whispered at a graveside years ago when I promised to carry discipline forward. The terrace doors opened, and Sarah Torres appeared, still in her cadet blues, eyes sharp and alive. She had slipped away from the chaos inside, and for a moment she just looked at me, really looked, not at the uniform, but at me. She straightened, then lifted her hand in a crisp salute, her voice hushed but certain. "Captain," she said, "you taught me more tonight than in training." Pride flickered in her eyes, not borrowed pride but earned, the kind that rooted itself deep. I returned her salute, and in that small gesture, the years of mockery lost their sting. Ethan approached quietly, his steps unhurried, carrying neither the arrogance of victory nor the shadow of guilt. He stopped a breath away, his tone, low, intimate, meant only for me. "Respect is earned," he said simply. "You've earned mine forever. No embellishment, no spotlight, just a truth placed in my hands like something solid, unshakable." I turned my gaze outward, across the glass towers rising against the night. They glittered like a constellation carved into steel, reminders of fragility and permanence all at once. My chest loosened, a quiet exhale carrying years of swallowed anger into the open air. Justice came late. I whispered to the skyline, the words sinking into the night. But it came. And then, as if the city itself conspired to underline the moment, silence fell from the ballroom behind us. No laughter, no jabs. For the first time in my life, Mallory's silence was louder than her laughter.